So now we have the Connected Navigator open, and I've got it open on the Accounts Payable screen. So I'm going to talk about how to set up EFT vendors. I'm going to show how to set up your forms and do a payment run, combine traditional checks with electronic payments, and then show how we disperse those. So let's take a look at our vendor screen first. And for those of you in Canada, we do have full Canadianization of the program. I am using the Americanized version right now, so the word check is spelled differently, just to point that out if those are anyone's wondering. So we click on the vendor screen, and I'm just going to find a vendor. I'm going to click find. I'm going to press my tab key to generate a list, very small list in my sample company, which is by name or code. And I'm going to pick a vendor here and go to the details. This is where we set up our vendor, our address, our information. But in this specific case, I want to point out two things. One is we have designated this vendor as an EFT, Electronic Funds Transfer Export. And down here, we've designated an email address. That is the email address that we are going to use to disperse a payment advice. What a payment advice is it's a form. It's like a check stub, for lack of a better word, that tells the vendor that when you've paid something electronically, it's communicating to them the date, the payment number, and more importantly, which exact invoices I'm paying. If you have a lot of activity with a certain vendor, you certainly need to tell them what you're paying in the event you skip an invoice or you're disputing an invoice or partially paying an invoice. Their records need to match yours, no matter how you're paying them, whether it's check or electronic. So that's key right there. That's how you designate this. By doing this designation, it allows us to do a payment run and combine traditional printed checks with checks that are EFT. So we can do everything in one shot, which allows us to do one big batch and get it all done. So I'll show you how that works. So that's the setup. That's how we designate them. So some of my vendors are designated as EFT, some are not. So the next place that we're going to look is in our settings window, and that's under Company Setup, AP Defaults. And if we click on the Checks tab, which will probably be soon changed, the word will be changed to Payments, we have Make Payments for EFT vendors that allows us to auto number them. So what we're doing is we're giving them a unique number. That's the counter that's being used, just like you would do if you're automatic invoice numbering. So when we do a payment, it gets assigned a number that's unique. And then down here, probably one of the most important things is we have a default subject and a default message body for our payments. And what that means is that when I email a batch of payments, it's going to say payment advice from, or form in this case, and my company name, and it's going to say dear vendor, attached is a copy of the payment advice. What I don't have set up here is I'm able to put in specific field references of connected. So I could go dear, and then I could put in a square bracket notation, which I'm not going to save, but I could say FAP and underscore vendor name. And I know that that field is the vendor's name. So what's going to happen is when I send an email out to 20 different vendors, each email will be personalized. It'll say dear and their name. And then it'll say attached as a copy of the payment advice. And you could personalize it with other information that's unique to that vendor. So that's something that's really neat. It allows you to batch email without typing any text at all and personalize those messages. We have a twin of this for customer invoices and customer statements. So it's working the exact same way. So that's a really important feature and very much used on our accounts receivable side when we're talking about invoices. This is a very popular feature, especially for the statements now. So I'm going to cancel out of that. The last place I would need to go for the setup is our forms. We have a great video on our YouTube about how to edit forms. So I'm just going to open this up and show you quickly that I could pick my payment advice. We have I have a single form here, but I can hit customize. And this is where you can edit the look of what your payment advice. So basically, this is my header here. This is the payable, the address. This is a message. And then down here is the transactional information. So if we paid 5 invoices, it would list them. Very similar to a check stub. So this allows you to put your logo if you want. All the same things that you would do with an invoice, so to speak. So that's how that works. Once again, great video on YouTube of how to customize your forms. And then lastly is the EFT export. Now this is in our forms, but this isn't a form that you print. This is an export format. So as the EFT stuff comes to pass, we've been working with more banks. I think we just did TD and we're working on Royal in Canada. I do believe we've done something for Chase in the US that comes to my mind anyway, because each bank wants a different file format. And we just save those formats and you can upload them into Connected. There's just an import and it will have the right format to format your EFT export. So that's how we deliver a file format to you. It's very simple. We send you an email and you import a file and it shows up here and then you can use it when you do your EFT export. So that's the setup. Now, when we make payments, Connected would traditionally be generating a check run. You'd go through your make payments window and you'd pick all the payments that you want to, or the vendor invoices you want to pay. This is a sample company. I got a laundry list of old invoices here, so hopefully none of our customers have this type of payables list, especially with our companies on it. But these are the payables that are open. Now, each one of the payables that has a green thunderbolt, shall we say, beside it, is designated as an EFT payment. So what that means is when I do this check run, and if I select all, which I'll do, the ones with the green thunderbolt will not have a printed check, whereas the ones without will. By doing this, it allows us to do a check run and post and print everything at once, but not touch or not print on the forms for the non-check payments. So if we go create, we're going to create payments for all of these items. And then now we're ready to post them. So if I go to post checks and I hit review, we're going to get a list of our unposted checks. These are the EFTs. These will not print. These will not take a check number. So if I started my check numbering at 1, it would go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's how the check numbers will go. So I'm going to proceed and I'll set my check number to 1. I think that's a valid number in this file, and I'll just print it to screen. This is, of course, when you send your checks, pick your tray and your printer and send them there. So this step wouldn't happen, but here's the checks. In this case, I have the check at the top. We have number 1, number 2. That one's a void because they're printing too many checks. There's too many on the stub. And we go through and we have number 5. So that's how that works. And then ultimately we would get to here. We would verify our checks printed and post. For this example, I'm not so worried about the printed checks. The thing that I want to just make clear is that I was able to do it all at once. I didn't have to do each separately. So now you may ask, well, what happened to the electronic files or the electronic payments? That's when you would go to your EFT export window. You would pick your bank. You would pick your check date. In this case, it's 010814. You'd pick a file creation number. This is typically required for most EFT exports. It's usually part of the header or it's a unique identifier. So you'd put in that number and then you'd pick your form and then you go export, and Connected would create a text file. It would send it to the destination that you asked for. And from there, you would go to your bank and upload the list of payments, and your bank would disperse the funds based on your posted checks. The reason we do it on posted checks is because we don't want the payment to ever be changed after you send it to your bank. And I'm sure anyone listening would understand why that's a good thing. We certainly don't want to change the dollars or anything in there because our records would no longer match the bank's. So that's how the export's done. And then finally, we need to tell our vendors, what did we do? What did we pay you? So to do this, we created a payment advice report, which isn't really, it can be used as a report. So we have a date here. I'll use this date. I'll say EFT exports only, so just the ones that I created EFTs for. And then I'll send it to the screen first. So if I send it to the screen, basically I get a list. This is my form. This is the form that I can customize. And if I scroll down, or actually I have to click through them, it comes up one at a time as separate print jobs. This is something that if I wanted to, I could print and staple to my invoices, like you would a traditional check stub, for example, and have a record of. Or, because you may do both, you could send this to the email window. And if I send this to email, we generate our batch email. This is once again exactly the same way that we would disperse customer statements and invoices. But now we've got a list of payment advices, which you just saw on the previous screen. We are going to be sending these to the address here. I've got it all set up as a connected address because we certainly don't want to be emailing random folks. If you want to, you can click on the hyperlink to view the payment advice. You can also change. We use the billing contact by default, but you might want to use a different contact if you want to within the vendor. So that's also an option. And then what happens is if we hit send messages, we will send all of these to your outbox of your email client, Outlook, or on PC or Mac. Usually that's the most common one. The message will have the default subject and text that we already specified, and the form will be included as a PDF attachment so that it cannot be altered. That way it's fixed, and when the vendor gets it, you know that they're seeing exactly what you sent them, and it's not being formatted by their email program. So once I hit send, it will go to my outbox, and that's how we deliver the payment advices.